Hi, Fairview family. Pastor TJ here. I'm excited to be able to introduce you to a new guest, someone that you may not see every Sunday in our congregation, but as we continue in the Stories in the Storm, he has a unique perspective that I think we can share, not only just nationally, but globally. But I'm going to go ahead and let him introduce himself. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hey, Fairview family. My name is Ben Shular. And I've been up to the church a few times, but I love that place, love the ministry, love the story and legacy about it, and so excited to have another opportunity to just interact with you. I grew up in Vancouver, Washington, just southern part of the state, and I've spent the last about 15 years outside of Washington, living overseas, and then also spending about 5 years in Anderson, Indiana, at the national office, and then just recently relocated at the end of last year back to Vancouver to establish kind of a more permanent presence for the National Church of God office on the West Coast.
Yeah.
And I currently serve on the executive team at Church of God Ministries. My title is Chief of Staff, and so I'm one of the 3 executives along with Jim Lyon and Natalie Farmer.
Yeah, I really appreciate you coming, Ben, and that's a lot to say that you've had time in the bush, literally, of Tanzania, and you and your family, you have a wife and a couple boys in tote that I know that my boys can relate to and just have a good time. I'm grateful for your leadership, and I'm grateful that, you know, everyone out here is familiar with who Jim is, obviously, as your direct boss, but you and Natalie in an org chart are right below, like you just said, as the 3 executives that kind of help steer Church of God with God's guidance. And so I'm so grateful that we have this opportunity, and you have that unique part where you still help oversee global with Andrew Gale, who's doing a great job, but also just a unique blend of you're here on the West Coast, you understand what's going on, you've been in Anderson, you've been across seas, and so that kind of lays out the opportunity, I think, for you to help share today just a perspective in the storm as we've been in this series to talk about what's happening nationally, globally, and so I'm excited to hear that and for our church family to be a part of that. So the first questions I've been asking people is just, how has your normal day been affected by COVID?
Yeah, that's a great question. Obviously, all of us have had some level of impact. Some have been spending a lot of time like, how do I fill my days? How do I fill my hours? What Netflix series am I gonna, binge on late next? And honestly, my experience has not been that at all. In fact, I've been busier during this time and actually trying to figure out how I can kind of take some breaks and set new boundaries or have still margin in my life. I'm not traveling on an airplane as much. In fact, this last 6 weeks has been the longest period of time that I've not been in an airplane in probably 5 or 6 years. And that's kind of been a good feeling. Like, I feel like I don't have to wear a name tag at home with my kids anymore. And so that's been positive. But it's been different. I was asked to chair the special event response team for the Church of God. When COVID came out in the middle of March is when we established that. And so we really jumped in on trying to be like a first responder. Just how do we figure out what's happening and how do we help resource our churches for being able to transition from ministry physically in presence to being able to do it virtually? And how do we help encourage our churches to be salt and light in their community and stay within the guidelines to keep us all healthy and safe? And so we've spent a lot of time focused on that. And so we've done a calling campaign in addition to our normal work. And so we've made 2,000 additional phone calls to a normal load over this last month with our team. And then figure out how we get our staff to work remotely. And that provided a lot of logistics, but we're all doing that now and doing it at a level that's good. So that part's been a transition. Since I came out to the West Coast, though, I'm on video calls normally 5 to 6 hours a day. So that part wasn't a big transition. It's just not traveling a lot for me. So I actually, my life got busier during this time. And but it's been a good busy. I'm excited because I think we as a church have an opportunity to demonstrate our relevancy in the community, where in some communities that relevancy or that spot has kind of lost, or it's not seen by the average person in the community. So I'm excited to be part of that and part of this, whatever the new normal is moving forward.
Yeah, and I can resonate with that myself. I feel like I've been busy as well since we landed. The church knows our story, and
Totally.
so we basically landed here, not even a month to prep and embrace this new, as you said, maybe norm that is taking place. It has been such a unique time, but I think one thing that we've really resonated with this is our opportunity to lean in. Well, we've had the child center, but also just we understand that God brought us here for this moment, so that we're here to help, for nothing less, be a constant and help be that light that Fairview is up on this hill. So I'm excited for that. I'm grateful that you've been able to do that you spent some more time with Kelly and the boys. So that's been good. Well, has there been anything that you've had to give up? I know you've kind of alluded to a little bit of the fact that you didn't fly as much as you normally would.
Yeah.
But you have an avid person. You have hobbies and you have different things as well.
Yeah. So that's absolutely true. This sounds kind of petty, but it has been like I haven't gone fishing one time during this time, and that's something that I really look forward to coming back. I love to be in the outdoors and especially fishing, and so that has been something that has been hard. I've been praying hard. I haven't attended any protests, just praying, choosing to pray. And I'm so thankful that on the 5th, fishing is opening back up, and I plan to utilize that with my boys. So we're looking forward to that. But I think the biggest thing has been lack of access with our family. Like we've really tried to have healthy boundaries, especially with the grandparents and other family members that are of high risk. And so that has probably been the hardest thing, to be able to do that. I would just say that my wife has kind of given up a little bit of her sanity as she's become a homeschool mom. Like that has been a change that was much more difficult. We thought. My wife's a teacher by profession, but she tells me she's received clarity through the Holy Spirit that she is not to be a homeschool mom. Like that, sometimes it's good to know what you don't want to do than what you do want to do. So that part has been there. But we're also, my wife and I are speaking a lot about what are our priorities going to be moving forward. And I think there's a lot of people right now that are flushing that out. Like now it's almost like a clean slate. Like we're erasing the whiteboard. What do we want to have up there? What do we want to be known about? And when I do premarital counseling with couples, one of the things I have them do is draw up their family coat of arms. Like, what is your family? What are you going to establish that your family is all about? If someone was to look at your coat of arms, like what would their takeaway be? What your priorities are in life? And so I think it's just like what does our new coat of arms come out of this? And I think it's going to look very different. We're going to really try not to be as busy and have better margins and not be as committed to activities or feel like we have to be involved in something or worried that we're missing out on something, and really focusing on just helping be Jesus people and like help foster personal relationships with Jesus. That is really where we want to be focusing on, even in our relationships with our family and in the community. I'll tell a short story here. I was at the transfer station a couple weeks ago. And we don't have a dump here, we have a transfer station now, but I think it's the same for Seattle. And so I was at the transfer station unloading a load of purged items and some other stuff from a project I was working on. And as I was leaving, I was really trying to just encourage and love on the gal that was checking people out, and just said, "Oh, thanks for being here. And I've heard you guys have been kind of busy." And she goes, "Yeah, we're up 300% in business this compared to this time last year." And I thought, 300%, wow, that's crazy. And so I was like, "Oh yeah, have a great day, stay safe." And so I drove out, but on the way home, that number kept resonating with me. And it's they're purging their house right now. That's absolutely what's happening. They're purging their house right now. And I think that there is a purging and realignment in their lives. And I think that we as a church have a real opportunity to be one of the priorities in people's lives moving forward. And I'm really excited for that opportunity.
Yeah, and Ben, I think one of the things that is kind of in the midst of this has gone on for so long. Experts say anywhere from 21 days on to establish a new habit. And so some of those things, like you said, whether you're erasing that whiteboard or you're hitting a reset, some of those things are really starting to take place, that people are having to deal with things. And I think this is an opportunity, and part of this series is to be able to share, because people are having to take a hard look at some of these things. And if I got COVID-19, am I going to die? Where does eternity live? In a lot of questions maybe that they wouldn't have had to wrestle with had this not happened. And so, like you said, there's a lot of opportunity for us to step into that gap, to be known for something, to be a catalyst for something that hopefully impacts them. We talked a lot, even you've been a part of the C4 that I've been going through, and to terminize that in a terminology is to say kingdom mindset, right? To have, God be a part.
Don't cough too much or we won't come near you, but
right.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. And that's part of the C4, the Chapter 4 Institute was brought about through a conviction of the regional pastors on the West Coast that just felt like the church on the West Coast has lost its position of significance and relevance in the average community. The average person in the community, when they're processing issues they feel convicted about, they don't automatically think of the church as that answer. And that's something that we need to step up into and to be that, because we know that Jesus Christ is the only answer, and to do that. And so we just need to be really proactive about what's going on in our community outside the walls. And so we're excited for that.
Yeah. And I think we've had an opportunity, again, with the Child Center to kind of step into those. And how do we continue to be a part of that? So next question would be something like, what have you had to add? I mean, I know you touched on a little bit earlier of some extra connection points, and that's come through phone calls. You and your staff have upped that ante to an additional 2,000, I believe you said.
Yeah.
So what has been something that you've had to add?
Yeah, I've added a lot more research time. My time has been a lot, I do a lot of interaction with people. Whether it's speaking to a group or working with a church and their board and a leadership team that can be smaller, or one-on-one with folks, or cross-cultural opportunities, international. And so I've done a lot, and I kind of have I'm kind of wired this way where I do enough research to get a job done. Like, I'm the guy that skims instructions when I buy something new. Like, I just kind of need to learn enough to get it done. And so I can kind of take that into life. So I'm not a guy who just gets super excited about sitting down and digging into a whole lot of research just for the fact of doing research. Not really wired that way. But I've needed to in this aspect. And in the early days of this COVID, we were, I was like whiplash. Like, I felt like I couldn't figure out what was the normal. So we were digging into research, figuring out what is safe, how close can we be to each other? Do we need to have our face covered? Do we have this? And so we thought we came up with great resources to send out to the movement. But then just as we're getting ready to push send, like, something new would come in and say, oh no, now we didn't want you to wear a mask, but now you should wear a mask. And so, man, I was just going crazy trying to figure all this stuff out. But, and we never did figure everything out, but we really tried to get the best information that we could out. And so I did a lot more research that has been added in. And the other part that I never thought would happen, which was super cool, was this payroll protection program that a lot of churches had access to. And so we've had a lot of organizations, and our churches have access to government assistance for payroll that was never available to religious nonprofits before. And so that's also been an exciting thing and will be a big help. So deep into research on that, piece. I've just spent a lot more time at the computer instead of interacting with people, just doing a lot of research. So that's a piece that has added in as well. So I'd say that's probably the biggest one.
Right. And what have you, like, in doing all this with the research and all these things that are taking place, where has been the most, where you've seen God show up in the midst of this storm?
Wow, there's been some really awesome, there's been just some great testimonies, especially of people like I don't think Fairview will ever know the full impact that you're having in your community by having the Learning Center, I'll call it open. I don't know if that's the terminology you use, but just the access for people to be able to still have a safe, and not only safe, but like an empowering place for their children to go, that is going to lift them up and build them into the best image of God that they can be. And that's a huge value for people. And I don't know the numbers for you, but I'm sure a lot of them, these are first responder folks that they're on the front lines, and they are people in critical roles that they need to be there. They don't really have a choice of being able to work from home or not. And so to know while they're trying to deal with, man, I hope I don't get sick as I'm engaging with people and all the other stresses that are having that. I mean, seriously, some people have been pushed to suicide through this level of stress. It's huge. But for them to know that their children are not only in a safe environment, but like a fruitful environment is so awesome. So that's a big thing. So I think that as we've watched churches do things exactly like Fairview's doing, or they're set up receiving sites to receive supplies for first responders or food for people. And so that's been a really big one. We've got missionaries around the world, about 60 missionaries that are based in various countries around the world. And some of our missionaries were able to make it back on planes kind of prior to the cutoff of international travel, and some of them were not. And majority of our missionaries are still on the field right now, and a good portion of them felt like it was just as safe for them to stay at home in their country of service than it was to come back to the States. And others were scheduled to be back during this time, and so they wanted to be back. And so we had to work with them. But we had one couple with small children that needed to be back for some immigration reasons, and we were really nervous because the flights were closing, we couldn't get them through, and we were very nervous. And then, the Lord just opened a door, and we were actually able to get them out on a consulate flight through the U.S. Embassy and be able to get them back from West Africa into the United States. And they're going through a 2-week quarantine period right now, but that was kind of the last ditch effort. And so the Lord has just really opened up some doors that we would have never thought that would happen. That's like a movie, where you have to go to the embassy and you're waving your American passport to try and get in and get help and get evacuated out. But it was a somewhat similar situation, a little less dramatic. When the movie comes out and Jim Lyon writes the script, it'll be a little bit more exciting, but it still is exciting in itself. And so that part's good. But so that's been an exciting thing, just to see people not just focusing on like, how am I going to survive through this, but how can I help other people around in the community through this? And then also just God's provision literally in the air and getting folks back to where they needed to be. So that has been another really exciting thing. And also, so that'd be a couple examples.
So Ben, I know that you speak a lot, that you have it. In fact, I know you specifically have a life verse, but what has been maybe a passage, or maybe even sharing your life verse for our church family, what has been something that you've had to cling to? You've said you've had to do some extra research and you've done some things, but what has kind of been a rock or a message that you've received from God during this time that's kind of been, like you said, a light?
Yeah, no, that's great. When I talk about life verse, the one that I go back to regularly is Philippians 2:5, where Paul's describing to the church in Philippi about, the nature of Christ and what we should strive to as Christians. Philippians is such an interesting letter. The church, wasn't having any like major disruptive things going on, like in Corinth or other places. It was really like a letter of encouragement to a church that was functioning okay, but maybe had some trouble. So it was a lot of advice and encouragement. But anyways, during this time, where my brain was going was into Philippians, where Paul is talking again an encouragement piece, and it's pretty common for athletes to have like Philippians 4:13, right? How many times have we seen that 4:13 on an athlete's arm? And I can do all things through God who strengthens me, and it is great. Like I'm not being critical of that at all, but I think it's often the verse before that is often forgotten. What actually Paul's talking about, it's not necessarily talking about physical achievement and what's going on. He's talking about that, like the perseverance of the trials and tribulation that's coming on, the good times and the bad. The only way we're able to get through anything is through the empowering of the Holy Spirit through Jesus. And so in verse 12, just before this, I can do all things through him who strengthens me, Paul is saying, I know what it is to be in need. I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or want. I can do all things through him who gives me strength. And that's been a verse, that verse 12 especially, where he's talking about all having plenty or having need, because as often as we are seeing people go, oh man, I wish I could go do something that I can't do normally. I wish I could get out of my house and go fishing, or I wish I could do this. Just as much as, wow, I'm eating way too much during this pandemic. Like I'm packing the pounds on. And so what a crazy problem to have. We have too much food to eat, and our focus needs to be on how we can have self-control. And that's just a total, like, how much of the world and even we could be in a situation where we are worried what our next meal is going to be. And we have that around us, of course, even in the state of Washington, there's those issues. And so for me, that has been that verse where I need to be content in the situation that God has me in. He has me in there for a purpose, and it's through his strength that will get me through it. And my role is to try and be salt and light and to encourage other people to have that same personal relationship with Jesus.
Yeah, I totally agree. You've already kind of ripped me up because 4:13 is my life verse, but
oh, totally. But that's because you're a stud athlete. That's why.
No, but I can't say it without referencing 12. Because like you said, I always have to share that part, because the contentment piece, even in today's, especially prior to this, contentment was such a stagnant word in our culture. Mm-hmm. It was like, to be content, you either have to be moving ahead or doing something. Even in that context of sports, to be content as a sports player means you're not getting better. You're not putting in the effort. You're not advancing. If you want to, we're big Seahawks fans up here, and we talked off camera that you're going to maybe wear a Brian Bosworth jersey because you're back in state. But
yeah, keep going.
but we love these things, and we love sports. We have that same passion, but you can't. Contentment is such a weird thing, but when it's brought into clarity during moments like this, the magnitude of it, and when you talk of the nature of God, it is such a unique time in a perspective that is, okay, like, here's this guy, again, you're talking of Paul, who is writing this letter, and throughout the course of his ministry is writing these things. We're talking about being quarantined. This guy's quarantined to a prison. He's being shipwrecked. He's being stoned. I mean, like you said, wondering if we're packing on pans is the least of his worries in the midst of writing these things. And so I think that that's very pertinent for us to be reminded of those things, to remember what is happening in that time. So I'm really grateful for that perspective, and I'm glad that you have that and that you've been able to share that with people.
That's been my verse. Now, you can't move on without me letting me explain why Brian Bosworth is my favorite player.
Go for it.
I also remember the $11 million 10-year deal that we never got anything out of as a Washingtonian. But I'll tell you, for my personal story, I was benefited from being raised up in the church, but I had a time in my life in my teenage years and early 20s where I was just not walking with Jesus and making decisions that were focused on worldly endeavors, and thought that was the end goal, and found no fruit in that. After a period of time, the Lord protected me during that time in the dark, barren land, and allowed me to come back, as He does, into a relationship close with Him. And honestly, one of my idols in high school was Brian Bosworth, man. I loved him. I mean, I had, when he was at University of Oklahoma, I had a Bosworth haircut in high school, like shaved on the sides. I had really long curly hair in the back. And I even put like I was Prairie High School, I cut lines in my hair, like just, yeah. Anyways, I look back and think it's ridiculous. My kids laugh at my haircuts from high school, but I'm just saying, like, he was somebody I looked up to, but that was a time in my life where Bosworth was changing worldly goals at the time, and that was an idol. But what's been so awesome and why he's my favorite player now is that if you know his story, he's totally transformed his life, and he's a Jesus guy now, and he is remorseful of the decisions and actions that he made back then. And that's just really honoring for me to see that Jesus takes somebody who had that access and lived that life, and to totally transform it, and to say that, no, all of those things I chased were worthless. They were empty goals. And the only true treasure out of this world is a relationship with Jesus. So that's why he's my favorite player. I wear his autographed jersey. And last season, they had him raise the 12 flag, right? And oh man, that was awesome. I loved it.
Well, no, I love that, Ben, because I love the fact that we just talked about that, and we just are coming off of the Easter season, and that's the ultimate redemption story. When someone understands the impact, they understand, like we talked about a little bit earlier, that kingdom part of it. And in fact, today, as a church, during our Sunday service, when they're watching this, we're going to have a chance to be able to take communion. And so I'll be able to lead them outside of this video live through communion. And I'm excited for that, because we remember that very thing, of that in the midst of all of this thing, the redemption plan that God had put in there. And if you were really quoting Jim on that part, taking back what hell has stolen. And that's right. Really part of what we're talking about, right? That as we get a chance we pray these prayers sometimes that God, take this from me, but oftentimes we allow things to creep back in, that you're saying, like you said, whether you're establishing a coat of arms for your family, and that's just getting marriage counseling and stuff like that, but you can say Jesus is the subject. Like, this is the centerpiece of who we are. Outside of that, we're going to have a little bit of margin, maybe like you said, of things of how we can step into that fullness, how we can enact that, how we can be that light, how we can be ambassadors for Christ and live that out in our community. And so that's super important and impactful, I think, for all of us to hear, regardless of, I noticed we've had people, not only just in Seattle, we've had people from, Idaho, where I was before. We have people from California, Hawaii right now, and all over that are hearing this. And I think that message right there is applicable to any of us. It doesn't matter geographically where we live. And so I'm really grateful for that. Well, one more thing I wanted to talk about is how can we be praying for you? And you've kind of laid out a few of those things. And so maybe kind of run us down a list of some things. Like, how can we be praying globally for some of those people that are left on the field? How can we be praying? You touched on, before we went on camera, nationally. We also have some mission opportunities with the Native Americans that we have. Yeah. And then also for you personally and your family, how could we be praying for a few of those things? Maybe just give us some examples that we could be putting in our prayer closet for you guys.
Yeah, no, thank you. I appreciate that. We covered the prayers. It's the richest level of support that we can receive by far. And so appreciate that. Appreciate the opportunity to share with those. Our missionaries, we're trying to walk really close with them. Majority of them, of course, are based very far away from we call their passport country, their home. And it's difficult when you're at a distance. I mean, we're in our home right now, and we have a certain level of anxiety because we don't know what's going to happen next. Or, what is the governor going to say at his press conference? Or am I going to be able to, when do I start traveling and on an airplane? What does that look like? And so we have these own levels of anxiety. But when you're 5,000 miles away from your family and home and the culture you grew up in, it's compounded by 10 times because you're just not there. And so online tools have helped, but it's still really difficult. So if you know the missionaries that you have connections to, just a word of encouragement to them and asking them how you can pray for them specifically and for their children is really, really important. And a lot of them are living in areas where if they were to get sick, the medical care is just very difficult. I mean, we joked in Tanzania where we lived, it was very remote, but we joked that we live 4-hour drive away from a bad doctor. And that was a reality. I mean, a good doctor was a lot longer away, probably an airplane flight. But so those are just levels of anxiety or difficult. So pray for our missionaries in that way. And also they have an anxiety of, as people have a financial impact from what's happening, they're really worried that a drop in giving could force them to leave the ministry that they fall to. And so we just pray as people are reprioritizing their life and their resources, their time and their talents, that they would also remember the great commandment that we all have to spread that gospel around the world. So that would be a big one there. And then we work with other areas that are really complex. And so prayer for wisdom and discernment. You know, we have a very strong ministry with the Lakota people, Native Americans in South Dakota, very close to the Wounded Knee massacre location. And these are a people group that you want to talk about break in relationship of lack of trust. They really have a lack of trust to non-Native American people because of just what's happened to them, or they've heard through stories passed down what's happened. So it's really difficult to build a trusting relationship with that people group. And we have missionaries there who are doing a phenomenal job in that and just living out Jesus in everything that they do and making Jesus the subject in all they're doing there. And so when you have a disease that can wipe out large populations, again, smallpox and other things historically have wiped out large numbers of Native Americans. And so this virus has also been high anxiety for them. And so pray for wisdom and discernment for our missionaries as they are looking for ways to safely help and provide assistance, and yet still respecting the boundaries that give comfort to some of the people there. So that would be a big one for our missionaries. And I would just say also pray for our churches and our pastors as they are. I mean, you at Fairview, not just TJ didn't tell me to say this, but I'm going to tell you, you're so lucky to have somebody who is innovative and who thinks outside the box and is looking for new ways to be impactful in what they're doing. And that's not always the case in our churches. In fact, I'd say it's a bit the minority. And so really pray for wisdom and discernment for our pastors as they are looking for Holy Spirit inspired ways to challenge and encourage their congregation to be that salt and light in their community and to make that difference and to become an answer, a go-to that even the non-Christian believers in the community would look to as like, wow, we have this issue. I wonder what the church can do to help us with that. Or I want to be like the church because I see them reaching that. And so that's what we want to do. And for me personally, it would be the same thing. I pray for wisdom and discernment every day. That's our number one thing, because I feel like I'm in a role now, and I've often been actually in my life where I can't do it on my own. There's just no way. Like, I'm so incomplete for the responsibilities that I have assigned to me. So anything I do can only be done through the Holy Spirit's intervention. And so I pray for wisdom and discernment and to have that nature of Christ that Paul's talking about, where we are utilizing all of our resources, whether that's financial or even influence through position and title or people who have worked for you, in a way that is lifting up to others and never self-promotion in what we do. And so those are what I pray for. And if you would join in prayer with me for that, I would really covet that very much. So yeah, thanks for asking about that.
Perfect. Well, Ben, it is always a great opportunity to hang out, spend a little time with you. I know that hopefully as things start to lighten up, as you live in the same state as us now, and as the dial slowly gets turned back, as he's been talking about, it's not a switch, that we'll have the opportunity to have you here at Fairview when that day comes.
Awesome.
And so we'd love to have you around, and hopefully our church family that is used to coming here, they'll get familiar with you as well. But I thank you so much for your leadership. Thank you for being there for Jim and the rest of the team, and all you're doing nationally, but also globally, and even here in the Northwest. And so thank you so much for your ministry. Thank you for taking the time to join us. And we'll be praying for you, but thank you so much for what you're doing.
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you. So excited. Fairview has such a great opportunity. It's so strategically located on the West Coast, and so awesome for this next season of what's coming out of there. So appreciate the invite, and look forward to more relationship with you guys.
You got it. Well, church family, thank you for having Ben with me today, and hopefully we'll get a chance to have him back and join us. But until then, God bless you all.